The Oral History Criminology Project, in conjunction with the American Society of Criminology, is pleased to present a conversation with Marcus Felson. We're coming to you in March 2014 from his office here at Texas State University, San Marcos, Texas. Just a brief bit of background on Dr. Felson. Dr. Felson started his academic career at the University of Chicago, earning a BA in sociology in 1969. From there, he went to the University of Michigan, also earned a sociology degree, this time a doctoral degree in 1973, with a dissertation title of Conspicuous Consumption and the Swelling Middle Class. From there, his academic appointments began to accumulate. First stop was at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, where he worked his way from instructor to associate professor. In 1984, leaving there, departing there for the University of Southern California, where he attained a position of Senior Research Associate for the Social Science Research Institute.
Mainly professor.
Oh.
Mainly, yeah.
Okay. Was that within the sociology department?
I had a joint appointment. I was a professor, but also a research associate.
Okay. From there, you jumped from the West Coast to the East Coast to Rutgers University from 1995, attaining the title of professor. Then, from January 2011 to present, you've been at the Texas State University. A couple of landmark publications, hoping to get your more elaboration on these. Certainly interject if there are things that I'm leaving off this list here. Crime in Everyday Life, now with its now having been released in its 4th edition, is a mainstay within the criminological literature at this point. Crime and Nature. And oftentimes, I think, an overlooked publication, but I think it's also every bit as worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as Crime in Everyday Life. Your seminal piece, 1979, is what most criminologists would know. It appeared in the American Society of Criminology, entitled "Social Change and Retrends: A Routine Activities Approach," co-authored by Cohen. You list as your interests, your general interests, of course you have specifics within each one of these domains here: daily activity patterns of crime, situational crime prevention, temporal and spatial patterns of crime, making crime concepts more tangible and precise. I think there's a genuine strain within your work there that challenges criminology to become much more precise in alliterating particular concepts and terms. Along the way, you've acquired a few honors. You're a member of the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences in the Netherlands, and you've also earned the Paul Tappan Award for Outstanding Contributions to the Field of Criminology in 2002, authored by the Western Society of Criminology. Now, I think perhaps the best place to start off would be a little bit of a biography on you and where you came into criminology. You come from a family there that seems to be very intellectually inclined. In the foreword to Crime and Nature, I believe you thank a nephew for having led you to Darwin in a bit of a way. And Richard, of course, is your brother there. That must have been an interesting conversation.
My younger brother. Yeah.
Growing up, that must have been really interesting. Yeah. I'm picturing you two talking about...
He was always pesky. But Rich, no, I have... my parents were a strong influence, and in a funny way, my grandparents were all immigrants, all born in Europe and East Europe, and they all, two of them died before I was born, but they lived in the slums of Cincinnati. But my father went to college and medical school and became actually a very well-known radiologist, and that had an influence on me that's relevant, because I learned, he was, I'll say, I can save that story. Let me go and say my mother was born in 1914, my father in 1913. My mother was alive today, 99, but she was a college graduate, and not many women in her era were.
That's incredible.
And so both my parents were in that sense intellectual and educated, and my uncles were, by and large, were. And my siblings all had advanced work in some way. Two of them musicians. The youngest and oldest were musicians. The oldest was a playwright, but also an attorney. The youngest a jazz musician and also an attorney. Rich is a criminologist, sociologist, and my sister's a classics professor at the University of Georgia, so we all were professionals in some sense. But the interesting story I was going to tell you is when I was about 11 years old, my father developed what's called the silhouette sign, which any radiologist would know and other work. And he wrote a programmed text that simplified and clarified. And his theory was that it's so clear and simple, it was for medical students, but that he should be able to give it to an 11-year-old. So he gave it to me, and I learned the silhouette sign. Well, there were 4 basic elements. And what he did is he x-rayed a glass of water.
Okay.
And he dropped a bone in, and he put a little paraffin on and the room for the air. So there are 4 densities on an x-ray that showed differently. He x-rayed that and showed them. And he extracted the 4 elements that go into an x-ray and how you combine them to infer whether somebody is sick or not.
Okay.
Now, what I did when I started, now let's jump ahead.
Yeah.
I was a young professor at university. This is where the routine activity approach came from. You want to hear this?
Yes.
I was a young professor at University of Illinois, Champaign Urbana. And I was there a year or 2, and then Ken Land joined the faculty.
Yeah.
And Ken Land got a grant. I was a co-PI, but he was a PI, to study social trends and cycles. And it was a pretty big grant, and we studied many dimensions of American society and how they changed. We gathered annual data. He was annual data from the period about 1947 to 74. And we studied each sector of society, labor force, education, we studied marriage and divorce, family, and we studied crime. But he wasn't interested in crime at that time, so he said, "Mark, you do that."
Okay.
Then I was Mark. The people who know me that long call me Mark, but Marcus is what since then. So I said, okay, well, I started by trying to model it, and nothing of the traditional social did not work. In fact, the opposite. This period in which crime rates went up 400 or 500%, were not periods of increasing poverty. The opposite. They were not periods of increasing, they had other increasing social problems, not poverty, not inequality.
Okay, so it changes the question in many ways, because it doesn't meet expectations.
I wanted to, I had to solve a problem.
All right.
So, first, everyone said, oh, it's the age structure, because there were more youths reaching adolescence. But that would only explain a 30% increase, not a 300, 400, 500% increase. So what is it? Well, I thought, well, maybe it's age squared.
Yeah.
I checked the victim survey, found that age predicts victimization too.
Okay.
Youths are more likely to be victimized.
Yeah.
So I said, well, maybe it's age squared, because you have offenders and victims.
Oh.
So if there are more youths, there are more offenders and more victims, and if it multiplies, you
overlap.
can get this.
All right.
You can get a multiplicative effect, and that sort of works. But then I thought, wait a minute, victim's the wrong word. If I break into your house, you're the victim, but you're not there. I may not know you or care about you.
Yeah.
It's your house.
All right. So that my age doesn't happen.
I have to separate target from guardian.
All right.
If you're personally attacked, then you may be the guardian or someone else with you. But if your house is attacked and you're not there, then the house is the target. And so we have to have 3 elements. We can't have 2. Offender and victim won't work. You have to have offender, target, guardian. That's where the routine activity. Then later I figured out, I figured from my father's work, I realized that to have something scientific, you can't have too few elements.
Okay, so parsimony as well as being able to explain to an 11-year-old.
Well, yes, but Einstein said it.
Yes.
Make it as simple as possible, but no simpler. Offender and victim is 2 elements, too simple.
Okay.
Offender, target, and guardian is better, and since then we've added a few more elements to elaborate.
Now, this thing wasn't an immediate hit. I was blown away when I read in the preparation for this interview that this had been rejected at six different outlets.
Yeah, we were rejected over and over. We were told among the comments was,
bloody.
this obviously talented sociologist ought to find something else to study. One of them said this is washed over clower-enola.
Yeah.
I mean, there were all kinds of nasty remarks.
So what made it such an obvious hit in the immediate aftermath, though?
Well, all of my work has trouble getting published.
Yeah.
It's only after it's published that it hits. And that's because it's, see, the way I put it, it's compelling. It's so simple.
Yeah.
I work very hard to make everything clear, to make everything simple.
Huh.
And I work very hard to write extremely carefully. I make it seem like it's ice cream for you as the reader, but it's not ice cream for me. I have to work hard to write.
Okay.
But I write very, very carefully. And my tables are very, very carefully done. And I've even had one table, I spent a month on one table.
Yeah.
It's the table on white collar crime.
Oh,
I spent a month thinking about that, organizing and getting all the examples.
Does that say something about the development of knowledge within the criminal justice system, or within the, excuse me,
The field's too sloppy. The field doesn't stay, people don't stay with a problem long enough.
Okay. Is that because there's such an emphasis on publishing? You just sort of get in where you can and then move on to...
That's right. And what I try to do...
Sort of target selection in a little way.
It is, and what I do is I want something that'll last.
Okay.
I'd rather have one article that has a major impact. Like I did an article on organized crime that's had a major impact on people who studied, not widely cited, except by the people who were doing the research.
Okay.
I've had another article, I've had another thing on co-offending that's now being used by a number of people. But what it's doing, and I also wrote an article with Mike Gofferson on the time adolescents spend with their peers and away from their parents.
Unstructured time.
And that's right, and that's the whole unstructured time. Oscar's word comes out of that.
Gotcha.
So in a sense, I've had a lot of indirect effect. But what I do is I don't care about just the publication. I don't want to waste my time, and I don't want minor findings. I couldn't be bothered. I want a major finding or nothing. If a publication's not a major finding, I'll tear it up and throw it away.
Huh.
I've written many articles I've thrown away.
Wow.
That I could have easily, in fact, I could have published them.
Yeah.
But if there's not a major finding, I don't want it.
All right. Now, could you go to rewind us in history here just a brief bit here and take us from that point in time when you wrote a dissertation at the University of Michigan on something that seems to be stratification.
It was.
How did you get from there to criminology?
First of all, I found that was accident, like all of life. What happened? It was about stratification, but it was about consumer behavior.
Okay.
It was basically, we were told that consumer behavior should be highly stratified.
Okay.
And what I found in the dissertation is that the sociology was only slightly right, if it was at all.
Okay.
That there was not a lot of consensus about that your consumer behavior was not structured as very neatly.
Okay.
Partly because not everyone spends all their money every year.
All right.
And not everyone saves the same amount.
Yeah.
And so the consumer function is actually more complicated.
All right.
And the other thing I found is there are different dimensions of both consumer behavior and of stratification. And I concluded that I also concluded in learning about consumption that the relative differences were not as important as the absolute differences.
Okay.
So if you live in a poor country, and you're a rich guy, I'm a poor guy, and you have clean water, and I have water where the sewage goes into the water.
Yeah.
That inequality is more important than a difference of whether you have a nicer car or an average car in the U.S.
All right.
But not to conventional sociology, which only sees relative. It doesn't see absolute.
So were you hired on at the University of Illinois as a conventional stratification?
Yeah, and I moved away from it.
Okay.
And I got sick of it. and I decided that social was not growing.
Okay.
It was proliferating the old stuff, but not growing, and not learning, and not willing to learn.
Okay.
And so I decided, and not willing to gather facts.
Okay.
And becoming more ideological, and I found, and more rejectionist of other information. And so I decided that in order to make progress, I have to free myself from any one discipline.
Okay.
So the way I see, yeah.
So a lot of that brings me to another point here. One of the interesting things about your work is that there are very few citations to what most would regard as conventional criminology. Now, how was it that you just sort of were able to take all the training there and all the exposure to conventional sociology there and say, we're going to wipe this film clean and then go into the connection here? Was it just a process of you just followed your own kinds of inclinations and picking up things?
I'm watching the substance.
Yes.
First of all, it's not criminology. It's criminology.
Okay.
Criminology.
Yeah.
Means that you're studying criminologists. It is the science of studying people who are studying crime. I'm not studying the people studying crime. I'm trying to study the crime.
That's an interesting way in which to sort of reverse fields.
Well, I'm looking the substance as
Yes.
close as I can. I want to know everything I can about crime, the facts,
All right.
all the categories. I want to know every type of auto theft.
Okay.
And I want to know the variations. And you know, there's some interesting things coming out these days. For example, the ICRS group at Simon Fraser University is finding that when you disaggregate the different types of crime, you find that the spatial patterns are very, very different. The Sean McKay image is not appropriate anymore.
Yeah.
That you'll have a high crime in this neighborhood of one type of crime.
Yeah.
But that type of crime is and it's low over here, but then the kind of type that's high here, another type of crime will be low here and high there. And so the patterns are very different when you look at one type of auto theft versus another type of auto theft versus residential burglary versus commercial burglary. And you'll find the time of day differences are dramatic. And you also find now with the hotspots research, which is confirming what we found years ago, that within a census tract there are such tremendous variations. And that came out of the hotspots research came out of a 1986, I think, paper of mine, Crime in Developing Metropolis is the approximate title. And in that paper, I showed how dramatically different crime was according to whether it was in a public location, whether it was in a warehouse, whether the different settings where different things occur. And from that came the hotspot by Weisberg and others.
Did your exposure to Chicago sociology have any influence? I noticed that in one of it's not even a foreword to Crime and Nature. It's like the first little inset there. It talks about your exposure to unknown sociologists Meyer and Mayer.
Meyer and Mayer.
And then you also write about Amos Hawley as being influential. Can you give us a little bit more about these really unknown figures?
All right. Meyer and Mayer organized a course called The Modern City at University of Chicago. And I entered there about 1965, graduated in 69, so it was 66 or 7 I took their course. It was the best course I ever took. Harold Mayer was a geographer, urban geographer, and Gerhard Meyer was a urban economist.
Yeah.
And Gerhard Meyer had a heavy accent, and the people will remember he came over, he was an intellectual, not published. I don't know if he ever became full professor.
Yeah.
He's someone who didn't really publish things. He had a heavy accent, and not only a heavy accent, he had a heavy stammer. But his material, you had to listen to him. You had to really be a University of Chicago student to listen to him, because no other university would anyone listen to him. Because he'd say, this is the supply and the demand curve, and that's the way he talked. But his material was excellent, his mind was excellent, and the two of them taught us about the fundamentals of urban sociology. and urban studies, it wasn't sociology or economics or, it was urban studies.
Yeah.
We knew about the density of an area.
Yeah.
We knew, so when somebody says we're going to put a mass transit line through a low density area, we know that that doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's not enough density to support it because we had the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Well, then I applied that to the routine activity approach. Now the other comment I'll make on the Chicago school, there is no Chicago school. The Chicago school it wasn't even in one building, and certainly not one approach or thing.
Yeah.
And Howie's written on this, Howie Becker's written on this, and others have. The one I followed was not Shaw McKay, who were incipient and did great work for their day.
Yes.
The one I followed was William F. Ogburn.
Okay.
Who, for Ogburn, the inventions were the key to social change. And Amos Hawley was influenced by it, and he developed human ecology. And the other, now he was actually he was at Michigan, but he came out of the Chicago influence.
Okay.
He actually went to University of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, my mother was a classmate.
Incredible.
And, but she didn't know him. He later became the intellectual. And the other one, but Mayer and Meyer really gave me the fundamental social science training, and that's the other thing we're finding. I find a lot of criminologists don't have the fundamental social science training to know and recognize patterns.
Okay.
And I'm sorry if I'm so critical, but that's what I think.
What was it about Michigan that attracted to you?
I went to Michigan.
Was Reese there?
I didn't go for any one person, and I didn't know I'd be a criminologist.
Okay.
I went because they were good for methods training.
Ah.
And they were.
Okay.
And I took a course there that was called the Detroit Area Study, and a lot of people came out of that.
Huh.
Now in fact, the head of the U.S. Census Bureau, Bob Groves, was in that program about when I was.
Huh.
And they trained you in survey research, beginning to end, fundamentals. We learned how to design the whole survey, how to ask the questions, how to do the sample, we learned all of it. We had to. They made us do it. They even made us move in a flophouse for a week or two. Let's see if I can remember. I mentioned that flophouse to a former Detroit policeman. He knew it. He made arrests over there. That's where they put us up.
So the methods, do you still use those methods?
Oh yeah, I think about it all the
the
time. I think about tangible things, how people converge, daytime versus nighttime. These are fundamental concepts in urban. What's the population's different during the day.
Okay.
You can't just look at nighttime, the nighttime residential population, understand the function of a city, or the function even of a rural area.
Yeah. Now, when you're crafting the routine activities approach, are you looking to any seminal figures there that were really instrumental in terms of these people have it right? I need to think about the
people you never heard of.
Yeah, can we hear about someone?
Leroy Gould, who figured out. See the issue. The issue. What is the right denominator for a crime rate?
Okay.
Also, there's. I just cited a name slipped my mind.
Okay.
There's a woman who studied in that era, and I cite her in the original paper. And she also, these people really looked at the denominator, figured out, for example, auto thefts per 1,000 cars.
Okay.
Or per robberies per bank robberies per 1,000 banks. These sorts of denominators. And when you look at the opportunity, you completely change your outlook. You have a completely there's something I did in the original routine activity paper that's now proving to be especially right now that we have the data. And that is, I calculated, I believe, the first rate in which the denominator was billion person hours spent at risk, in different activities. For example, what's your risk of being victimized per billion person hours at home compared to a billion person hours at work versus billion, or in the streets versus billion person hours in some other place? And it turns out the differences are hundreds of times more risky when you're on the street or, you know, public place. And those were the first calculations. Now we're finding those very, very strong for both victimization and offending.
Okay.
That it's the activity denominators, the exposures to risk, that design it. And that I learned from the demography course at the University of Chicago. And that was taught by Philip Hauser, who had been head of the Census Bureau. And he taught us the way you do science, you have to think about the exposure to risk. You have to look at your denominator, get the right denominator. When I met Ron Clark, who had a major influence on my life, as did Paul and Pat Branningham, they have a real understanding of the denominators. Ron's written on it and so forth.
Is routine activities, is it victimization, is it criminal?
It's all of it.
It's all of it together.
It's a convergence.
So is that why you see it so commonly cited? Is that maybe part of the explanation of why it's so successful? Is it because people can apply it in a variety of different realms?
Well,
see, I've seen it in the peer influence literature. I've seen it in the control literature. I've seen it in the neighborhood literature. I've seen it in the rational choice literature.
Okay, I'll tell you why I think, what I think is good. And
okay.
Our problem is, if this is total clarity, I draw a picture of a man climbing out of underground, climbing out of a cave, and trying to get up to the ground level.
Okay.
And he's up here and he's climbing and trying to get up.
Yeah.
And low is confusion, and high is clarity.
Okay.
And so we try to work at clarity, and our concepts are actually down here. So Sean McKay started with things like social disorganization, which is a vague concept.
Yeah.
And the field had made it vaguer.
Okay.
If the field had taken it and made it clearer, then the field would have done them justice. But instead, we took a concept that was half clear and made it a quarter clear.
All right.
And so we moved down.
All right.
Now, what the routine activity thinking does is it's clear, it's designed so you can't screw it up.
Okay.
It's designed to be so simple and so clear that even somebody who's careless can't mess it up. Now, I will admit, one time in a meeting, someone started, I won't name who, but really did mess it up, and I had to put my hand up and say, that's not what it is. It is what I said it was. It's simple, clear, and I want it that way.
Okay.
And that it's not, that's the point. That's the point. You want resilience or whatever you call it. You want something to last. You don't want someone to go to the periodic table and redesign it and make it all confused so you don't know what the elements are.
No, what do you see the situational stuff that's been an outgrowth of this particular paradigm, if we call it a paradigm?
It's a middle level theory.
That's right. So you take where does middle range theory fit with what is going on within the criminological literature?
That's a grand theory. Multiple grand theories, pre-paradigmatic.
So are they talking past each other?
Yeah, because it's pre-paradigmatic.
Okay.
There are not multiple paradigms. There's one or zero.
Is there any hope for bringing the two together?
No. No. You don't know. Whenever you mix, when you mix clarity with confusion, you get confusion.
Ah. Okay.
You always, if you have clarity, you don't mix it with confusion.
All right.
The field is in confusion, and it will stay there. The conventional field, in other words, trying to predict, trying to explain why people are bad.
Yes.
And to draw a line between the bad and the good people. That is a hopeless enterprise.
Okay.
Am I surprising you?
In a bit of a way. Those are nuances that I hadn't really contemplated, but I think there's something to be said for those kind of things. I would be hopeful there that there would be some kind of convergence.
Oh, I hope not.
No.
No, I don't want to converge. It'll mess it all up. For one thing, let's say you take, I don't know, let's say you take Agnew's theory.
Okay.
All right. Agnew's theory starts out vague and gets vaguer every year.
Okay.
And what it is Strain is everything.
Okay.
Individual, group,
All right.
everything. I don't want strain theories, whatever they are, to be mixed with routine activities. I want to talk about the tangible world, and a little bit above it, I want a middle range theory. I don't want a grand.
Don't you think these other more abstract theories could benefit from including some of the concrete items, though, that you pointed them in the direction of?
They'll essentially ruin it.
Okay.
The whole point is that there's demand for vagueness. There are people who like vagueness and don't want to be picked out.
Now, how has this been received within the United States vis-a-vis or in comparison to the international community? I noticed that a lot of your via is you going out and telling various elements of the world that this has value.
They invite me.
Why are they more receptive?
They invite me.
Why?
Well, because Peking doesn't look like Chicago.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Los Angeles doesn't look like Chicago either.
Yeah.
So, and it turns out Chicago today doesn't look like Chicago in 1930.
All right.
So a lot of the things that were relevant, it's not that there's zero relevance or we won't learn anything from it.
Yeah. Is there political resistance to incorporating some of the things?
I think you have to wait for the old guys to die off.
Yeah.
I mean, and it has been said in the history of science, this has been said over and over,
Yeah.
that people do what they learned in grad school. They have trouble changing, they have trouble growing.
Okay.
And they're not even, I mean, you have people are ossified.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Kuhnian kinds of machinations here in terms of how ideas endure.
Except for one thing.
Yeah.
It's pre-paradigmatic.
Okay.
We're not talking about a field that is shifting from one paradigm to another.
Okay.
We're talking about a field that has no paradigm.
Okay.
But believes in their non-paradigm. In other words, in effect,
Yeah.
there's off-the-shelf theory.
Yes.
Where there's 6, 7, 8, somewhere between 6 and 37 theories, depending on how you name it. Okay.
All right.
Now you have a problem. You
Yeah.
take one of those theories off the shelf.
Okay.
When you're done with that problem, another problem, it won't work for the next problem, so you put that theory back on the shelf and pull another one off. So you keep changing like the tools you have in your drawer when
Yeah.
you're cooking dinner. You need a peeler, you don't need it anymore when you're done with the carrots. You're
Yeah.
cutting the onions, you bring out a different tool.
Okay.
You put it back. That's what
Yeah.
these theories are. They're not, but a paradigm
Yeah.
is something where you keep the same one out.
Okay.
Well, you don't put the periodic table back in the drawer when there's another chemical coming out.
But at some point, wouldn't it have to relent or submit to the empirical evidence there when it becomes the argument?
The empirical evidence keeps showing this stuff, but the problem is not the empirical evidence. The problem is how many steps you get away from the tangible world.
Okay.
If you have some evidence of something and you've got a simple way to explain that that's pretty close to that,
Yeah.
and then you've got another way to explain it that's 10 or 15 steps away
Okay.
with lots of abstraction,
Yeah.
I go for this one. So, for example, I'd much rather talk about why, I had a great example the other day, see if I can remember it. There was, why is it that when, the family dinner together.
Okay.
Now, one of the things in the paper on peers and parents,
Yeah.
I asked that I had a whole questionnaire designed about activities when you were young.
Yeah.
Think back to you were 17. Did you do this? Did you do that?
Yeah.
Did you have to be home for dinner?
Yeah.
How many nights a week? Did you have to be home in the evening on weekdays? How many nights a week? If you weren't home, did they notice?
You talk about chores. And
All
like
of
that.
these chores,
Yes.
all these things.
Yeah.
Basic down to earth stuff. Now, it turns out that there's a literature now on family dinner together, and kids less and less are required to have family dinners together. But you could interpret that as saying, well, the family dinner together, your parents will teach you to be good.
Okay.
And then you'll go when they're not there and be good when they're not watching. Well, I don't see it that way. I said that family dinner means you have to be home.
Okay.
If we're kids, we're teenagers.
Yeah.
and we were gonna get in trouble together.
Yeah.
But even one of us has to be home for dinner. We can't do that.
All right.
Even one of us.
Yeah.
So if we both have to, we're even less able. So, and I did calculations. If you randomly pick 2 kids in 1 year and then another year, and what's the probability that neither of them have to be home for family dinner, and showed how that changed.
So do you think maybe criminology is making it too complicated, too complex?
Absolutely.
Okay.
However, there is a complexity. I would rather deal with the complexity of learning more about crime.
Okay.
Than the complexity of learning just a little about crime and a lot of abstractions. In other words, if I have a scale, I'd rather have factual information and low-level generalization, close to that. Rather have that weighty and a few abstractions, rather than have a few facts and a lot of abstractions.
Okay. Goes on to
the verbiage. I have a simple thing. What's the ratio of findings to verbiage?
Oh.
Or verbiage to findings. A high ratio of verbiage to findings is no good.
Okay.
I've got a low ratio of verbiage to findings.
Thinking about the canon of work that you published here, what would you point out as being the defining one or several there that you would point people to in terms of that?
Crime in nature, but you know,
Why didn't it get the reception that you and I think it may have?
It just takes time. It's more complicated. Every page is simple, but the compilation is complicated.
Okay.
In other words, if you read every sentence is easily written, easy to read, easy to. But the problem is, it's a whole different way of looking at things.
Okay.
So in order to read Crime in Nature, you have to think about it and you have to absorb it.
Okay.
And it's a different. I mean, I rearrange all kinds of it. I redefine the game.
Yeah.
In terms of wasps.
Yeah.
In fact, I retitled it. There's a French version of it.
Oh, yeah?
Les gants et les guêpes. Guêpe is the French word for wasps. And the reason is that the point is, I mean, this is just an example.
Yeah.
But it turns out that there's something called, you want to hear about this?
Yeah.
Mullerian mimicry. Mullerian, you know what mimicry is, where let's say
a viceroy butterfly imitation.
Yeah, or a snake that looks like a venomous snake, but isn't. But the predators won't eat it.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that Muller, who was a Brazilian biologist, entomologist, discovered that wasps all have a yellow-black tail.
Yeah.
And some of them will sting you, and some of them can't sting.
Yeah.
And there are thousands of types of varieties of wasps, species, and so on. But it turns out that the ones that don't sting get the benefits, the group benefits, and it's called Mullerian mimicry because they have a joint benefit.
Okay.
Now, in a way, a gang is like that, because if you and I wear blue, and blue is supposed to make other people scared of us, then we have an incentive. There's a service that provides.
Okay.
And that washes off. In other words, I'm not tough enough to scare everybody off alone, so I need these others, or the image of the others, even if it's partly fake, to scare them off. And that's what a gang is about.
Okay.
It's a service I want. The problem is it often backfires.
Yeah. What would you say your defining characteristics as a scholar are?
I don't like bull. I like simple language, and I like clarity, and I like tangibility. I like to stick close to the tangible world, and I don't like pretension, and I don't value complexity. And partly, I think that because I have no doubts about my intelligence.
Okay.
I therefore have no need to advertise it through complex usage.
All right.
I don't have to do that. I already know I'm intelligent. Okay, let's get over that. You're intelligent, I'm intelligent.
Okay.
Now what do we have to do?
All right.
Now that doesn't mean I won't do a little bit of but I would rather, if I'm gonna show someone I'm intelligent, I'd rather do it by showing them I can get to the point faster and make it clearer.
You and I were talking just briefly before we began here that it's had a pretty great reception in terms of applying and policing venues here. Is that fair to say that the simplicity?
I'm told.
Yeah.
I'm told, and they tell me, police tell me that.
Okay.
However, a lot of police don't. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
them do what they were doing anyway.
Okay.
So, and some police vary like other organizations and other occupants of organizations. A lot of them do what they,
Okay.
do ordinary things and do what they were always doing, or do nothing. So they're they're not different than other occupations in that. But some of them do resonate with this, including a number of my students.
Okay. Are there any regrets or sort of misgivings or things that maybe you thought you wanted to do more of along the way?
Well, yes. What I want to do, and I'm 66 and I was born in 47, I'm a little too old for this. What I really wanted to do, and I'm convinced others will do it, I wanted to catalog all the different types of organized crime.
Oh, wow.
And I believe that there are dozens and maybe probably hundreds. And I believe that the problem is that I believe that I'm too old to start because I think it would take 15 years. But there are some outstanding Dutch scholars, particularly European scholars, are the best organized crime research now. And one of them is especially beginning to do this.
Huh.
And I'm convinced that, and there's a British scholar who's also very, very good, and I believe that they are going to do this, particularly the younger of the two, the other ones are closer to my age, but I think it's something will take 15 or 20 years.
Now, is there a growing convergence between the international community of scholars and the domestic criminological scholars?
I believe not. I believe that the Europeans and Canadians are trying to bypass American criminology. And what's happened, and they're doing one of two things. There are people who really are coming up with good stuff,
yeah.
And there are people who are basically imitating American, putting the old one in new bottles and aren't really doing anything new but think they are.
Okay.
And they are also going through some of the stages that I hope we got out of, the stages of the 50s and 60s of overcomplicating everything.
Okay.
And we see some of that, particularly in Britain. But we have other British who are doing very good work, particularly at University College London, where the best criminology in the world right now is probably at University College London and at Simon Fraser University in Canada. Usually the best criminology is not at the premier universities. For example, not at Oxbridge, not at Harvard, not at Chicago anymore, not at, go wherever the prime way, not at the Sorbonne, not at, you can go on and on.
What kinds of advice do you think you would offer at this particular point in time to young scholars? How are they going to
specialize, number one. Don't go this, I study all crime, really. The second, learn big data sets, big.
Okay.
Million cases, 2 million, 5 million. The Brenninghams have 10 million, 11 million cases. The reason is you can then subset and get the relevant cases. You don't have to do this, relate this big to this big, you rate this to this. All of your prediction goes up, all of your clarity starts coming. Your intellect starts sharpening, you can write a decent article. The next thing is shorter articles, focus.
Okay.
The grandiose articles are going to pass. The next thing is look at the new abstract form, which 3 journals, including Journal of Research and Crime and Malignancy, have started, where there's a clear statement of 4 topics in the abstract, background, blah, 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 which is something that forces the field to become more focused on a real problem and not trying to do too much. And the other thing is not to do a kitchen sink grand regression or general linear model, but to take a much more restrained topic with limited number of, with a clear hypothesis, and then do instead a sensitivity analysis where you say, does this simple, give the crosstabs,
okay,
give the margins, and then say, does this simple relation hold in other circumstances?
Right.
Rather than throwing it all in an equation, any real finding is basically drowned by all the control variables. And so there are real findings in the journal, it's just that neither reader nor writer know they're
there. There's a mantra that's in your book, to keep it simple. It seems like it captures the one.
Yes, but it's hard work to keep it.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't realize. You need, so the thing, we're on the verge of a paradigm. But not for studying criminals,
yeah,
but for studying crime.
Okay.
Events. If you look at, we have a group called ECHA. We meet every summer, June or July, in a different country usually. We're meeting in the Netherlands next year. We met all over the world. Yeah. And we meet, there are about 30 of us, but it's swelled, there are now twice that number. And we give the best papers better than the ASC or any of those. Ours are very tangible, very down to earth. We have a substantial consensus among us including crime analysis.
Yeah.
We don't do criminal analysis. We don't look at bad guys. That we type that in, we acknowledge that there are individual variations, but that's not the key to organizing.
Okay.
The key to organizing is organized information by events and by different types of crime.
Okay.
And by prevention and by what circumstances make a crime likely or unlikely. And we find extremely strong patterns very often, including 100 times more risk a year than they are per hour exposed. And so our findings are much stronger than what you see in most of the field, and they're much clearer. And we are also conversant. We don't have trouble trading notes because we're not dealing with vague abstractions. We're this far. We have abstractions.
Yeah.
But if this is the tangible world, we may be here or here. We're not here.
Forgive my ignorance here, but are there alternative journals there that you guys are creating? The infrastructure?
Yeah, but we also are increasingly in the conventional journals. Okay. We have to fight our way in.
Yeah.
But increasingly they do.
What's the resistance in the conventional journals? That you don't elaborate on these theories and propositions that you find that muddle the clarity and
I think there's an acquired inability to muddle. I'm sorry, an acquired ability to muddle, an inability to see tangible and simple. And also, I think there's a parallel with intellectuals. I think intellectuals often define their special role in society in terms of the arcane language.
Okay.
Notice, I think that the very, I mean, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Of something I'm discovering. There's terms like, very often people talk about trajectories.
Okay.
What is a trajectory? It's supposed to be smooth.
Yeah.
Turns out when you look back at the data, individual offenders are very jagged.
Yeah.
It turns out that the mathematics smooths it and throws out that individual variations. And so it is a reification, or it's really the ecological fallacy, because what you're doing is taking a group smoothness and imputing it to individuals.
All right.
And so the whole trajectory thing is a distortion of reality. Now, it stems from something that was rather smooth, height.
Okay.
The height in adolescence, your height, you get taller, you have a growth spurt.
Yeah.
You don't get shorter. When you're 13 years old, you aren't shorter than when you're 12.
Yeah.
Your growth spurt may have been at 12 and mine at 13 or mine at 11, but the main thing is, and they stretch out, they have a little different, but they're all basically like this, group and individual. But the crime doesn't work that way. Crime's jagged, individuals are, it's episodic.
Okay.
Now, there is something smooth. What's smooth is your time use, how much time you spend with peers and away from parents.
Okay.
And that's a relatively smooth change.
All right.
But the episodes, as you're away from parents, the episodes are episodic. To be, and that people would try to make episodes into something smooth, it makes you wonder, what are they thinking?
Yeah.
And often I keep coming up to this, what are you thinking? You know, or are you thinking?
Yeah.
Or you would be, you know what, a standard exercise I have is I have my students go through the articles in the main journals.
Okay.
And check things like the scales. Check the samples, check the statements they make.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be surprised how many articles have a sample where they're only poor people and then they say income didn't explain anything.
Okay.
In other words, they have a variable that doesn't vary and then they say it didn't predict. Or how many times they don't describe the sample. Or how many times they have a table where the decimals don't line up. Now, if you're interested in quantitative research, I still hear my second grade teacher yell at me if I don't put my decimals straight. How can anyone who's seriously pretend that they're quantitatively careful and they can't line their digits and their decimals up?
All right.
Is this what's wrong with people if they won't follow the fundamentals?
Okay. What are some of the more exciting developments within situational crime prevention that are going on right now?
I would say the most exciting, a couple of things are first discovering that offenders and their hangout patterns follow the same situational rules and the same, not the same is the wrong word, they follow also very situational rules and are highly predictive of the trouble people get into.
Okay.
That's one, to me, that's most exciting. Another thing is that we're discovering much more about directionality. I can show you a map based on the Brenningham's work, and there's other work in Europe and elsewhere that's showing that offenders tend to go in, if there's 360 degrees in a circle, half of their trips to crime, half of their journeys from home are in 30 degrees.
Wow.
Towards the mall, towards the entertainment district, towards town, this sort of thing. In other words, offenders' patterns of movement, their patterns of activity are highly structured, not perfectly, but highly structured. And it turns out that what the traditional criminologists think is minutiae, and beneath their dignity to study is actually the core of the field. And they don't know it, but we know it.
Yeah. What kinds of things are you specifically working on that you find particularly compelling?
What I work on, I do tertiary analysis.
Okay.
What I do is I go to other people's analyses and I sort of redo and recalculate things.
Okay.
Sometimes on a spreadsheet, sometimes on a calculator, basically different ways I do it, or I work with students. So I work, right now I'm in a phase where I want my name last, I want the others to get more of the credits. I don't put my name on at all. I get a little, and I just basically try to get other people to do these things. And what first of all, I got a group of people together to study transit crime.
Okay.
Because transit, including public and private transit, and parking lots and bus stops, and a lot of crime occurs in these public places, disproportionate. Highly disproportionate. And so there's a group of people doing that, and they're very good. They're 40-ish, and they're and I'm helping them, but they don't need my. I'm helping them except for one silly fact: they don't need my help. They're very nice about it, but they don't really need it. They're very good. And the other thing is, there's very good modeling now, beginning, well, more than beginning, of how offenders find their targets, how they forage. And it's very exciting to learn that.
Okay. Another way in which we advance ideas is through the mentorship process that happens at the university level here as well. Has that been productive in terms of placing people into various walks of life there where they can begin to apply some of the principles that
and some of it, interestingly, is the master's students.
Okay.
It isn't all the PhD. I have master's students as well, and my master's students are sometimes security managers for big stores around here.
Okay.
And they're using them. They'll come back and say, last week, well, one of them came back and said, last week I busted a burglary ring using what I learned in class. Another will say, well, last week I redesigned the store to knock out certain shoplifting, and this sort of thing. and one of them got a promotion showing PowerPoints. He took the PowerPoints in class.
Yeah.
I said use them. He adapted them to his store, showed them to the boss, got a promotion to apply those ideas, and so these kinds of things are gratifying to me.
Okay. Thinking about the state of criminality, we've sort of touched on it, but maybe to put a finer point on it. What do you think criminology ought to be doing more of then?
Big files.
The big files.
Insist that students take the next generation learn the data management and data, what we call them, the big data access and those. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be the programmer, but you have to be able to talk to a programmer now.
Okay.
So if you know access and know criminology, but someone else is really doing the program, you can ask the techie.
Yeah.
You can ask the right question and explain it. And we're basically going to find, I think that I think it's already happening, that the center of gravity is shifting outside the United States because Americans are stuck in the old stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas other than maybe Temple University and a little bit at University of Cincinnati, it's basically Simon Fraser and University College London, and also the Netherlands at the Free University in Amsterdam, where the most work is being done that's really new and useful.
Okay. Any future endeavors that you've got planned here in terms of?
I'm always doing stuff. And one of the things I'm finding is that the younger generation now can do it better. For example, visualization is becoming important because to visualize, we now have we're shifting from the following situation. We were in a situation before where there's too little data.
Okay.
And when there's too little data, you need strong theory. Doesn't mean people have it, but when there's now we have too much data, and when there's too much data, you need strong theory because you get lost in too much data. So that's the difference. That's the fundamental shift. The most important thing happening is that the cell phone data and the other technological data that is coming out, cells, GPS, all of this, is producing for the first time population data that changes by the minute or hour, whatever, but not, you don't have to wait every year for a census survey or something, or every 10 years for the US Census. Now we have not just the residential population, we have a shift by the hour, by the minute, and we can look at how the crime patterns do it. But some of that, the people who are technically good enough to do that are just beginning. They're having meetings. They're applying it to behavioral sciences increasingly, but they don't know behavioral science. They only know the techie. They're trying to apply it. And so in the next few years, we're going to see denominator data that we never had before. And we're also going to see things like apps for adolescents where they say where they are and what they're doing, and we link that to their delinquency.
All right.
So, and it doesn't have to be that person's delinquency, it can be the general. So we now are we're in the process with the new technology of getting a snapshot and repeated snapshots of everyday life that will transform how we analyze it and how we analyze crime.
This brings me back to a point that I made about the earlier discussion of the earlier portion of your career, but sometimes new data bring forth new theories. Would you attribute the creation, the elaboration of routine activities to the NCS? Is that why there was?
I would say, I would say the victim survey made possible the routine activity theory in a lot of ways. Now, along these lines, there's something interesting let me suggest that I only realized this year. I went back and looked at the time of Cat Lab and realized that there was no calculating machine then. And then I looked at what pencils were like and got up pictures of the old pencils in that era. And they were pretty crude, but they had pencils. All of the calculations for Quetelet and Gailly were done by hand. that meant that some clerk in each département was calculating by hand and sending it to Paris, or sending it, and they were tallying those.
That's interesting.
Now, the theory they had that showed maps by département was that way for a reason. Are we running out of?
No, we got time.
We got time.
Yeah.
The reason that their maps were big is that their data were good.
Okay.
Then came John McKay. Now look at what they had. They had an old calculator machine. Boom, 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 boom.
They had the pins on the maps.
They had pins on the maps.
Yeah.
Now, they technically had data, they had addresses, but there's no way they could have produced hotspot analysis electronically with what they had. So they did social area analysis with 70 or so, 77, 70 to 80 social areas because the technology made that possible.
Okay.
Now we end up with the dime maps and the old one and all the stuff, and Denny Ronsek, who really invented hotspots, did the first work on dangerous places, but he did it by block, and he had to work very hard to get a couple articles.
Yeah.
Now we get that stuff in minutes, and we find that those original patterns that go back to Shaw and McCabe are obsolete, that it isn't a social area that's uniform, it's the variations within are greater than between.
Okay.
So it turns out that it was the available technology, data, and data compiling ability that limited the theory. The theory was the product of the data.
Okay.
It wasn't the data producing the theory. The data producing the theory was the theory being produced by the data.
Okay.
Now we have better data. Why stick with the theory that's now obsolete with the new data?
That sounds very exciting.
Well, I think the problem is, I think I just proved it to you. What more do I have to say? I guess I can fill it in with references or something.
That's sort of a fitting.
Make it boring, make it.
A fitting code into our conversation, unless you have anything else to offer here. Did we miss anything, or?
That's about it. Let's see, you've done anything differently? I don't know. I don't know what what I advise the young Scott, I have a little dilemma. They ask me, my students say, well, what do? Are we going to fight this whole business? Are we going to try, if we don't do the conventional stuff, how am I going to get promoted? How am I going to get a job?
Yeah, I'm thinking of your idea of being very insistent on, I don't publish unless it's a big idea.
Well, they can't do that.
Yeah.
They have to do small. First thing I tell them, do something small, piece by piece.
Yeah.
What I think is that because people are imitating the most circulated journal terminology, most of them don't end up getting it in there.
Yeah.
And they'd be better off going to a specialty journal on a specialized topic. Okay. You have a better chance to become a specialist and become an expert in a topic, adolescence or adolescent crime or adolescent health or something like that. Go for the relevant journals. And find a niche. And I think they're better off doing that than trying to be the generalist, because only a few people are good at being a generalist. Yeah. And mostly they're good writers, and that's how they do it. The very best writers may get away with it.
Okay.
But a lot of people don't get away with it. A lot of people try and don't make it that way. I'd say don't try that. And I also, I think what happens is the older people in the field replicate by finding young people like themselves. So in effect, the 30-year-olds in the field are really about 80 years old, maybe 180. Okay. In effect, what happens is the field changes slowly, and one of the ways that it sees to it is by picking younger generation members who are anticipatory elderly. Okay. And so what my message to the younger ones is, for God's sake, do better than my generation did.
That's a fitting caveat. It captures quite a bit of the sentiment. But well, thank you.
Is that camera really?
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time here. I guess we'll go ahead and wrap.